No Rest for the Wicked. I'm sure most of you have probably heard of it by now, but if you haven't, it's kind of a mix between Diablo and Dark Souls or Souls-like, with a bit of survival elements mixed in, but we'll get more into that. I'm Sam the Ashen. Let's take a deeper look into No Rest for the Wicked. Also, happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there. And to the sons, don't forget to give your moms a call if that's something you can do. So officially, it's an RPG action Souls-like, and it was released in early access on April 18th, 2024. It's been picking up quite a lot of steam. It has around 21,000 reviews on Steam at the time of this video's release, sitting at mostly positive, which is really a lot for how recent it was released. It was made from the same developer as Ori and the Blind Forest and its sequel, Ori and the Will-o'-the-Wisp, which are both widely loved in the genre of Metroidvania platformers, with the second one having over 100,000 reviews at overwhelmingly positive, which is pretty impressive. You might be thinking that these are totally different games, so it doesn't really mean much. This could be true, but it's worth considering that one of the things Ori is praised for is level design. And any gamer knows how crucial level design is in a good game. Just look at Dark Souls, a game released back in 2011. Yes, it's actually been that long. And it's still to this day being praised for its incredible level design. So the point being that if No Rest for the Wicked has great level design that we know the devs are capable of, it will go a long way. Now, I am the type of player that wants to go explore every nook and cranny in an open world game, or really any game, which means I get through games pretty slowly. I have not totally finished No Rest for the Wicked, but the parts that I have played, I have definitely paid close attention to. The level design so far is pretty solid. The areas aren't too large or too small, more importantly, they are densely packed. There are enemies strategically placed throughout the levels, which are usually around your level unless you go off the beaten path into a more difficult area that will let you find better loot and reward you with more experience, which I am a fan of games doing. The game is a top-down 3D, so its perspective looks a lot like Diablo. There are ladders leading into broken castles or a hole leading into a dingy cellar, and this helps to add verticality to the game. Possibly one of the most important aspects for a game like this is the combat. The combat in this game is generally liked from what I've seen and read in reviews, and I personally like the combat a lot. One of the major reasons I like the combat is because of the weight or the impact of attacks. If you're using daggers or a short sword, your attacks are quick and precise. You can hear the metal clashing against the enemy armor or slicing through an unarmored enemy. If you're using a great sword, the swings are slow but really powerful, and they seem to hang in the air before crashing down on top of the enemy. With the bigger weapons, you can really feel the impact of attacks. Even when you block with your shield, you can feel your character bracing themselves and being pushed back by the enemy's own attack. When you finally get the timing on the parry down, which isn't too tight, it feels pretty great to pull off. You definitely feel like you just masterfully countered your opponent with just the edge of your blade and sent them staggering back so you can punish them with a heavy swing. This game has heavy or charged attacks, which can be strategically used if the opponent is rushing you, or if you want to get in there, get a big attack off, and then dip out. There's a pretty solid amount of weapon variety so far, from daggers to swords to long swords, to maces to axes, greatswords, bows, staves, and possibly more will be added considering this game is in early access. All the weapons feel pretty different from each other, each with their own movesets, and I'm sure different players favor different weapons. I haven't found any weapon type yet that is so obviously better that it makes the others not worth using, which is definitely a good sign. The combat overall so far is great, and I'm sure there's more to come. The enemies in No Rest for the Wicked are kind of a mixed bag. I will say first off that they do a decent job of adding enemy variety, and also different enemies usually have very different movesets and styles. There are regular sword and shield guys, pretty basic. Big, heavily armored great axe guys who are slower but hit really hard, and have some surprisingly fast moves to change things up, but nothing really unfair so far. There are enemies that will have a crossbow in one hand and a sword in the other, becoming a threat both at close range and at long range, And on top of that, they can easily dodge backwards to make space to shoot you again. Yeah, the crossbow guys are definitely annoying, but they're not badly designed, I don't think. There are fencer enemies who can parry your attacks, which makes you be pretty selective about when you attack, making it sort of a dueling situation, which I definitely enjoyed. There's also weird monster enemies that you really have no idea what they can throw out at you until you get in there and fight them, which adds suspense to the fights and keeps you on your toes. The enemy AI isn't terrible, but I would say that it definitely needs some work. It's not anything game-breaking or anything like that, but some of them are easier to cheese than they should be. Some of the early game reduced down to me charging a heavy attack, connecting, then rolling away to charge another heavy attack. Some enemies would dodge, others had ranged attacks and they could easily counter me, but most of the enemies got smashed. It is what it is, it didn't ruin anything for me, and that strategy really only worked well against one-on-one, so it's not a big deal, the game is still challenging. Let's get into the survival mechanics because there isn't a whole lot to talk about. I will say that the survival mechanics do feel kinda half-baked, meaning I think the game is having trouble picking what genre it wants to be. That's not to say that a good game can't dip into multiple genres, but when you're exploring and finding treasure chests full of loot, defeating different enemies, and then all of a sudden you see a tree that you can chop down and it takes way longer than it should, it kind of hurts the momentum of the game, and personally, I would be happy if they just reduced how long it took to gather materials like wood from trees and ore from rocks. I saw other people complain about this and I thought they fixed it because in the early game it would only take a few seconds. Then when I got into a harder area it would take literally twice as long or twice as many hits, and this felt way too long. I'm sure other people might say it's just a couple more seconds, not a huge deal, which is fair, but I don't see anyone getting upset if they reduce how long it takes to do these tasks. They do have their uses for these materials, like buying your own house in the hometown of Sacrament, and then furnishing it with different things like couches and chairs, so maybe half-baked is unfair to say, but it definitely still needs some work. It is in early access. I touched on exploration earlier when I talked about level design because they tie in together, but I'll go into it a little bit more. This game has pretty good level design and the exploration is pretty solid too. There are plenty of off the beaten path little side roads to go down and explore in the hopes that you might find something good, which I always enjoy in games like these. To add to that, when you go out of your way, you are usually rewarded with a chest full of loot or a higher tier gathering site, which is kinda meh, but you're almost always rewarded in some way. This part is great. Unfortunately, the chests are usually full of the same things. A few resources, maybe a bomb here and there. This has been pretty annoying for me personally when I really just want to find a unique weapon or a cool piece of armor, something. It doesn't have to be anything crazy, but something other than materials every once in a while is nice, I think. I might be way off here, it might be intended to get the good weapons and armor from bosses and materials from the chest, but I still prefer a little something in the treasure chest every once in a while. Also, for what it's worth while you're exploring, there's not a lot of cheap deaths from enemies, at least. Every time I went to go get a chest on the edge of a cliff, I thought for sure that I was going to get truck sticked off the edge, but I never was. Not yet, at least. For weapons and armor, or gear in general, there seems to be a decent variety as far as weapons go, but nothing crazy. As for armor, I've found different rarity tiers of the same armor more often than I've actually found different armor. So I'm not a huge fan of that so far, but I'm sure they'll add more as the game gets updated. A lot of the reviews I read, the negative ones, were about the game's performance. I don't have a crazy PC, I'm pretty sure it would be considered mid-tier, and my game has run really well so far, with just a few frame rate drops here and there, and this is without changing any of the settings, which I'm sure would help if people do experience performance problems. And hopefully the devs hear people's complaints and can better optimize the game if that's what the cause is. Another side note here, I played for the first 10 hours on mouse and keyboard and it was fine. I didn't have any problems, but when I finally tried a controller, it was significantly better. Being able to easily aim your swings and have 360 degrees turning radius makes a pretty big difference, especially for the walking the plank parts. So if you have the option, I would try the controller. If you don't have the option, well, you're probably already used to mouse and keyboard in general anyways. That's just about all I have to say about the game so far. Overall, the game is pretty solid, and I've had a lot of fun with it, especially enjoying the combat. $40 US might seem a bit high for an early access game, which is probably true, so there's that to consider. This game also has a high budget, it's a well-developed game, so there's that to consider too. I appreciate you watching the video. If you did enjoy the video even a little bit, liking or even commenting really does go a long way. I appreciate all of you. If you want to see more from me and subscribe, I post once every 2 weeks on Sunday, so I'll never clog up your feed. I hope you have a good one. Peace out.